it's funny because originally growing up, I was like, I'm never going to be an interpreter. I didn't want to do that because I felt like that's all I did my whole life. Um, but I did want to work with the deaf community. I always knew that I wanted to do something within the deaf community.
I am actually teaching here specifically because it's a school for deaf students. I don't think I would go into teaching if it weren't for deaf education. I think the deaf culture is amazing and rich, and that's what I got interested in.
So before I came to Katzenbach, I was in a public school. And it was hard for me to understand all the other kids because they could hear and they didn't really communicate in sign language. I didn't have any deaf students to communicate with and really wasn't right for me. We had to wait and try to find a deaf school that was appropriate for me.
There's been a series of students over the years who've transferred here and have come in really shy. There's been a couple who have come in pretty like gregarious and social too, but there's been students who I've seen transfer in and then just completely blossom here as they're surrounded by ASL, as they have access to the entire school and the entire curriculum. They have access to the bus driver, to the cafeteria staff.
You could say good morning to your principal, and the principal can sign. The teacher's assistants could also sign. And in the case that you don't feel well, you would have to go to the health center, and the nurses can sign as well.
I prefer coming to a deaf school because everybody signs here and it's so easy for me to communicate. It's so much better than being in a public school.
Again, the communication is what's very important. It's very difficult for many deaf and hard of hearing students to have direct communication with their peers in a mainstream program.
And in the public school, I could only have the one interpreter. There was no other deaf people. So here it's just easier for me to communicate with everybody.
So deaf children can really only communicate with their interpreter in a mainstream school setting. Their friends, possibly, maybe if they knew some sign, but most of them probably don't. So there isn't much direct communication that is happening in mainstream programs.
Here you wouldn't have to rely on anybody. You could be very independent. I'm allowed to be involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. I've been on the basketball team, and I've been a manager on the basketball team because I can't really play because I have some health conditions. So I was involved with a soccer program as well, and I played for a short time, and then I became a manager.
I see them blossom and be able to take on more leadership, be able to follow their interests, and be able to become really strong individuals.
So in mainstream schools, they typically have around 10 to 15 deaf students in the school, and it's like 1,000 hearing children to a school aside from that. For the deaf institution, it's all deaf and hard of hearing students. So that means that there are typically no hearing students, and with that, the people in instructions could also sign. So that means that students have access to direct communication with everyone, especially the adults.
When I was in kindergarten to 5th grade, I had to go to a public school. And we had interpreters, but not many. And then when I was completed 5th grade and went into 6th grade, it became more challenging for me. And it was hard for me to understand, hard for me to keep up, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy for me, and I didn't have an interpreter at that time, there was no other deaf children for me to socialize with, so it was sad.
I think a lot of people here say it feels like a family and a really strong community. That connection with ASL and deaf culture means it feels like a home to many people.
My experience here has been wonderful. I have good grades in class. Most of my classes I have good grades. And I really enjoy coming here because we go on trips, we play games with my friends, and I just enjoy being here.
But really, growing up here was awesome. The program for the deaf and hard of hearing children, teachers, us, And not really just the education, but the love and connections the teachers have here for their students. It's just really special, and I don't think they can find that anywhere else.
So, as part of growing up in a deaf family, all of my family members attended at the time was called the New Jersey School for the Deaf. I remember as a young child, we would come to the school for various events. They always had class reunions or picnics, and just the deaf community would gather here, and it was part of my growing up. I would just, tag along with my mom and dad, and we would come here and have socialize, and I would have, other kids that their parents were deaf just like me, and I just felt at home being here.
So the differences that I see since I started in 1977, at that time, we were employing total communication, which means we were signing and talking at the same time. And now we use the bilingual strategies using only one language at a time. I would say probably 95% of the students here were classified as auditorily impaired, with 5% being multiply disabled. And at this point in time, I would say about 55% of our students are classified as multiply disabled students. And the remaining 45% would be auditorily impaired.
So the big difference is, I think, the population that we have is much smaller. When my parents were here, there was probably up to 600, 700 students.
The declining population in Katzenbach has happened over the past 15 to 20 years. It's not just at the Katzenbach School for the Deaf. It's at most deaf schools in the country.
Well, yeah, there's been big changes. When I attended Katzenbach, really, we had so many students attend here. And all the buildings here were all full. And all the classrooms were all full. And we were just like a big family. And now the numbers are not as high anymore. I think more kids are going to other programs, like mainstream programs.
So when I was growing up, there was a lot of deaf institutions that were oral based. So it was very much so centered around the belief that, back then around the 60s and 70s, if you were signing, you would never be able to learn how to speak. And so there was more of an emphasis on speaking rather than using sign language. And it was strange because I came from a deaf family, and my parents were actually put in an oral-based school. So, years later, I asked my parents, hey, so why did you guys get put in an oral-based school? And they said, well, we thought that's what was best for us. But now we kind of sit around and we're like, that is oppression.
I have more of a hope for the future, and partly as a hearing person, I don't think it's really my place to say what the future of educating deaf people is. I think my hope for the future for deaf education is that it will be strongly led and influenced by deaf adults and their experiences and their guidance of what it should be.
So I've got concerns. The future of deaf ed isn't something that I'm really worried about, but it's the future of deaf institutions as an entirety. The funding by the state is what really concerns me. And, the issue really shouldn't be an issue, but it is an issue altogether.
I wish deaf students that are in mainstream programs, I wish that they could at least come here and just see what the environment is like here. We pride ourselves on being a school with direct communication. I wish really that the deaf kids can experience what I experienced by going to an all-deaf school like MKSD. And we had so many activities. I was able to participate in sports. I made a lot of new friends when I came here. I can't really imagine what my life would be like if I didn't come here. Yeah, I think it's helped me, and I'm very grateful to MKSD for my experience here. I'm grateful that I came here. I had a great social life here. This school really is my second family.
I realize that my retirement is not too far off in the distant future. But the choice that I made to come to Katzenbach was one of the best decisions that I made in my life. I think I have received so much more from the students and staff than what I have given. It has brought me the greatest joys in my life to work here. Difficult to explain, but it is very, very fulfilling. And I'm grateful for these 38 years that I've had at this school. And I hope that the school continues forever.